The shot that killed Red McTavish was so close that the powder smoke drifted straight into Sheriff Eli Rooker's face as he kicked the saloon doors apart, and for one stunned heartbeat, he thought the woman holding the smoking Spencer had fired at him. She had not. Red lay on his back in a spreading lake of whiskey and blood, mouth open like he still meant to curse, eyes already filmed with the dull surprise that comes when a man finally meets something faster than his own meanness. The Spencer's muzzle never wavered. It rested easy in the hands of a woman every soul in Dos Cabezas, Arizona territory, believed had been dead 7 years. The piano stopped mid-chord. Cards fluttered from frozen fingers. Even the whores on the staircase forgot to breathe. Eli knew her before his mind caught up to his eyes. The straight fall of blue-black hair in twin braids. The high cheekbones burned darker than any white woman's, the mouth set like a knife edge. She wore a man's faded cavalry jacket over a doeskin dress gone gray with desert travel, and her moccasins were caked with the red dust that only comes from the deep Chiricahuas, and Nanashi, the Apache wife of Taza the Raider. The woman taken in the Tressermanas massacre of 72 dragged off screaming while her wickiup burned and the soldiers laughed. The woman whose name had become a ghost story told to keep children quiet at night. Here she stood, 30 summers old, alive, and the room stank of death around her. Evening. "Sheriff," she said in English so perfect it cut sharper than Apache. Her voice was low, smoke rough, the kind of voice that made men lean in just to be sure they heard right. "Your bully drew iron on a woman buying a drink. I finished the argument." Deputy Caleb Mercer, 19, freckled, still half convinced Indians were born with horns, took one shaky step forward, Colt half raised. "Ma'am, folks buried an empty box with your name on it." "Folks bury a lot of empty things," Inanna replied. She let the Spencer lower, slow and deliberate, until the barrel pointed at the sawdust between her feet. "Some of them ought to stay buried." Old Doc Hollister pushed through the bat wings, spectacles fogged, bottle courage sloshing in his veins. He took one look and the color drained from his whiskers. "And sweet Jesus. Your boy." The name died in his throat when her eyes snapped to him. They were black as wet obsidian, and something ancient and furious moved behind them like storm clouds over the dragoons. "Not here," she said. One soft sentence, yet every man felt the floor tilt. "Not tonight." Eli stepped between her and the roomful of twitchy guns. He had faced Comanche, rustlers, and one crazed grizzly in his 38 years. But nothing had ever turned his guts to water like the sorrow coming off her in waves. "Ease down." "Everybody," he said, voice steady by sheer will. "Red's been begging for this dance since he shot that Mex kid over cards last spring. Looks like he finally found a partner." No one argued. Red McTavish had been poisoned on 2 legs. Half the men in the room owed him pain. Inanashi's gaze swept the saloon once more, lingering on faces she had once known, some older, some gone meaner, some already reaching for the comfort of a bottle. Then she looked at Eli, really looked, the way Apaches study a man when they decide whether his heart still beats true. "I'm not staying," she said. "One night. Then I ride." "One night for what?" Eli asked. She was already moving toward the back door, boots silent on the warped boards. At the threshold she paused, lamplight gilding the hawk feathers braided into her hair. "To lay eyes on my husband one more time," she said without turning. "After that, the dessert can have me again." The bat wings creaked shut behind her, and the spell broke. Men exploded into talk, questions, curses. Caleb started forward, but Eli caught his arm. "Let her go, son." But Sheriff, that's Taza's woman." "The Army's got a $500 dead or alive on her head since." I said let her go. Outside, the street was silvered by a rising moon. Inanna walked straight down the center of it, past the darkened assayer's office. past the Chinese laundry, past the frightened faces peering from windows. No one stepped out to challenge her. Maybe it was the blood still dripping from the cuff of her cavalry jacket. Maybe it was the way she carried 7 years of silence like armor. At the livery she whistled once, low and two-noted. Aline Nez Persipalooza, with one blind white eye, trotted from the shadows, Nen brands fresh on its shoulder. The horse wore no saddle, only a rawhide hackamore and woven saddlebags light enough to carry a ghost's belongings. Eli followed at a distance, badge heavy as guilt in his pocket. He watched her check cinches that weren't there, watched her run a hand down the horse's neck the way a woman strokes a child. She's missed too long. He stepped into the moonlight. And she didn't startle. Apaches don't. You still wear that star? She said. Not a question. Some habits die harder than men. She gave a soft huff that might have been laughter once. You were decent to my people when decency could get a white man shot. I remember. I remember you too, Eli said. Remember you singing while you ground corn outside your wickiup. Remember Taza watching you like the sun rose in your eyes. Remember the day the soldiers came. Her shoulders stiffened, just a fraction. I was 20 miles north, Eli went on, voice rough, chasing rustled stock. By the time I got back, the smoke was still rising. They told me no one walked out of Tresor Manna's wash alive. Almost no one, she corrected. She swung up onto the Appaloosa's bare back with the fluid grace of wind-over grass. Moonlight slid along the Spencer's barrel now cradled across her thighs. Eli took one step closer. What happened to you, Ann? 7 years. People deserve to know. She looked down at him, and for the first time the mask slipped. Beneath the iron he saw exhaustion so deep it had carved new lines around her eyes, saw grief so old it had turned to stone. People deserve a lot of things, Eli Rooker, she said. Most of them don't get them. The Appaloosa danced, eager for the road. One night, she repeated. Then I'm gone. Tell your town not to ride after me. Some ghosts bite. She touched her heels to the horse's flanks and they moved off down the street. No hurry, no fear. Just the steady rhythm of someone who had already died once and found the experience disappointing. At the edge of town she paused beneath the gallows tree where 3 rustlers swung last spring. She reached into her pouch and drew something small, letting it fall. It glittered once in the moonlight before the dust took it. Eli walked over later and picked it up. A single blue trade bead, cracked down the middle, threaded on a rawhide string gone dark with age. He closed his fist around it and felt the years collapse. 7 winters, 7 summers, 7 empty graves, and knew that whatever storm this woman carried inside her was fixing to break. Over the territory like judgment itself, behind him the saloon doors banged again and voices spilled into the night, arguing, speculating, already turning her into legend. Eli didn't join them. He stood alone under the hanging tree and listened to the hoofbeats fade south toward the black wall of the Chiricahua, carrying the woman every man in Dos Cabezas had buried back into the desert that had never quite let her go. Somewhere out there, Taza waited. And somewhere beyond that, something older and colder than vengeance was waking up. Eli slipped the cracked bead into his pocket beside the badge he suddenly wasn't sure he deserved anymore. And for the first time in 20 years he felt afraid not of dying, but of living long enough to see what came next. Eli Rooker rode out of Dos Cabezas before the town dogs had finished barking at the moon, the cracked blue bead burning a hole in his vest pocket like a live coal. He left no note, no explanation. Only the badge pinned inside his coat, hidden the way a man hides shame. The trail south was clear as scripture, one set of Appaloosa tracks. Deep in the 4 hooves, like behind no saddle, no white man's weight. Inanashi traveled the way Apaches always had, like smoke that knows where the wind is going. By the time the sun cleared, The Mule Mountains, it was already a white-hot coin nailed to a sky the color of bleached bone. Heat devils danced on the flats. Eli's canteen sloshed half-empty and growing lighter with every mile. He did not slow. Near noon he found the rawhide bundle placed deliberate in the center of the trail, weighted with a fist-sized chunk of rose quartz so the wind wouldn't take it. He knew before he opened it. Inside lay the tiny beaded moccasin and the single long black hair. The beads were the exact shade of summer sky over the Chiricahua before a storm. The hair still carried the faint scent of sage and morning. Eli sat his horse a long time, staring at the offering. He had seen Apache women leave such things at graves or at places where children had once played. Never on a trail meant for pursuit. "She wants me to follow," he said aloud. His voice cracked in the dry air. "Or wants me to know why I shouldn't." He slipped the moccasin inside his shirt, next to the skin, and rode on. The country turned mean after that knife-edged ridges, canyons that swallowed sound, country where a man could ride 10 miles and end up lower than he started. Lizards skittered under rocks at the hoofbeats. Once a mountain lion screamed somewhere, close enough to raise the hair on Eli's neck. By late afternoon he reached the base of the great red spire the ending called. "You wanna have way thee a stone that weeps." Even in drought a silver thread of water slid down its face. Catching the light like a tear, the mountain could never finish crying. Cottonwoods grew at its base, rare green in a land of rust and bone. Thin smoke rose from a cave mouth. Halfway up the cliff. Eli ground-reined his horse and climbed. Boots slipping on loose scree, Winchester cradled in the crook of his arm. Sweat stung his eyes. Halfway up he found fresh drawings scratched into the soft red sandstone. A woman with braids riding away from burning wickiups, a tiny bundle against her chest. A man with a scarred cheek holding a baby toward the sky while coyotes circled below. The lines were raw, made with charcoal and desperation. At the cave mouth he stopped. Taza stood waiting. He had grown harder in 7 years, taller somehow, though Eli knew that was impossible. Bare-chested, wearing only breechcloth, moccasins, and a cartridge belt slung low. The knife scar that ran from left ear to the corner of his mouth had whitened with age, a lightning bolt frozen in flesh. His eyes were black glass reflecting fire. "You should not have come, lawman," Taza said in Spanish, voice low as distant thunder. "I'm not here wearing the star," Eli answered in the same tongue. He kept both hands empty and visible. "I'm here wearing the weight of a dead child's shoe against my heart." Taza studied him the way a wolf studies a rival, curious, measuring, deciding whether blood must answer blood. After a long moment he stepped aside. Inside, the cave breathed coolness and the sweet bitter smell of burning cedar. Firelight painted the walls with moving shadows. Ananashi knelt on a woven blanket, grinding medicine plants with a mano and metate. The rhythmic scrape of stone on stone the only sound. She did not look up. "He is dead," she said in English, flat and final as a coffin lid closing. "Our son, smallpox, 3 winters ago." Eli felt the floor tilt beneath him. He had known somehow from the moment he saw the moccasin, but hearing it spoken aloud was a blade between the ribs anyway. "I carried him into Mexico when the soldiers came," she continued, never pausing in her grinding. "I bargained my freedom for his life. They let me go if I vanished and never returned to the reservation. I thought distance would save him." A pause so small it might have been a breath. Distance only made the dying quieter. Taza stood motionless by the cave wall, knuckles white on the stock of a Winchester he wasn't aiming. Yet Eli found his voice. "Last night you said you came back for 1 night only. Why?" Ananashi lifted her head at last. Her eyes were dry, burned clean by grief too old for tears. "To look upon my husband's face while it still remembered joy," she said. After tonight I ride north, to Fort Bowie, to Captain Harlan Graves. Eli's stomach turned cold. Graves is walled up with 200 men and a Gatling. Then the walls will learn what Apache sorrow can do. She stood, and in the flickering light she seemed carved from the same red stone as the mountain itself. He signed the order for the infected blankets, she said. He murdered children who had never held a rifle. My son was 3 moons old when the fever took him. I sang him across while his skin peeled away like paper in fire. The grinding stone fell from her hand and shattered. Taza spoke for the first time, voice raw. It is her blood debt. She rides alone. Eli stepped closer to the fire. There's another way. Evidence. Washington. I've seen officers hanged for less when the newspapers get hold of it. Ananashi laughed short. Sharp. The sound of a bone breaking. Washington is a city built on Indian graves, she said. They will bury the truth with another treaty. She walked past Eli toward the cave mouth. He caught her wrist gently. The way you catch a falling knife by the blade, Anne. She stopped but did not turn. I was 20 miles north the day they hit Tres Hermanas, he said, voice rough with memory. Chasing rustled stock. By the time I got back, the smoke was still rising. They told me no one walked out alive. Almost no one, she whispered. Let me help you finish this without finishing yourself. She pulled free and stepped into the sunset. Outside, the Appaloosa waited, ghost pale in the dying light. N swung a bareback, no saddle now, only a rawhide hackamore. She carried a war lance decorated with hawk feathers, and tied just below the blade hung the tiny beaded moccasin. Swaying like a heart on a string. Taza followed her out, stood beside Eli. If she dies tomorrow, Taza said quietly, I will burn Fort Bowie until the stones melt. Then help me stop her. Taza's scarred face twisted. Some rivers cannot be stopped, lawman. They must reach the sea, or carve the world in two. Then looked down at both of them, her husband, her past. The white man who once tried to be decent in an indecent world. Taza, she said softly, remember me laughing by the creek when the cottonwoods were green. That is the woman you married. Keep her alive inside you. She leaned down, pressed her forehead to his in the old blessing, then startling them both to Eli's. If I fail, she whispered to him alone, plant sage on my grave. No cross, no name. Then she wheeled the Appaloosa and was gone. Galloping down the slope in a thunder of hooves and red dust, the tiny moccasin flashing once in the last light before the desert swallowed her, Taza stood unmoving. A single tear cut a clean trail through the dust on his scarred cheek, and fell to the sacred ground. Eli watched the horizon take her, felt the weight of the child's moccasin against his own heart, and knew one thing with the clarity of a man staring into his own grave. He would follow her into hell if that was what it took to keep one more Apache mother from bearing another piece of her soul. He ran for his horse. Behind him, Taza lifted his face to the first star and spoke to the night in Chiricahua, voice breaking, ride with her, my son. Guide your mother's lance. Then the mountain wind took the words and carried them south, chasing a woman who had already died once and found the experience only made her harder to kill. 3 dawns after Ananashi vanished into the Chiricahuas, Fort Bowie woke to the sound of a woman singing death. The song drifted across the parade ground on a wind cold, enough to bite through wool. It was low, ancient Chiricahua words older than the mountains, and every soldier who heard it felt his scalp crawl loose. They spilled from the barracks half-dressed, rifles in hand, expecting a war party on the ridge. Instead, they saw one woman, and Ananashi rode dead center down the road from Apache Pass, bareback on the one-eyed Appaloosa. Her braids were wrapped in blood-red cloth, war color. She carried no rifle now, only a lance feathered with red-tailed hawk. and tied just below the iron point hung the tiny beaded moccasin. Swaying with every step of the horse like a child's heart still beating, she sang the same death song over and over. Voice rising and falling like wind through a graveyard dot at the flagpole, she stopped, planted the lance upright in the dust with a single thrust, and dismounted. Then she walked straight toward the officers' quarters, hands empty, eyes fixed on the door as if she could see through wood, and lies to the man cowering behind it. Captain Harlan Graves burst out in red long johns and boots, face purple with whiskey and terror, army Colt shaking in his fist. "Arrest that squaw!" he screamed. "Shoot her if she moves." 2 lieutenants and a dozen troopers fanned out, rifles raised. None of them quite managed to point at her. The song had gotten inside their skins, and kept walking. 20 paces. 15. Graves cocked his Colt. "Far enough. Damn you." She was 10 paces away when Eli Rooker stepped from the sutler's store shadows, Henry rifle leveled steady as prayer. "Lower every weapon," Eli said, voice quiet but carrying to the stockade walls. "That's an order from the president himself." Graves spun toward him. "Rooker, you traitorous," and then the ridge came alive. Taza and 6 Chiricahua warriors rose along the parapet like black paint bleeding upward, faces streaked with war ochre, Winchesters already cocked. The morning light glinted off brass cartridges and cold Apache eyes. Every blue coat froze. One wrong twitch and the fort would become a slaughter pen. Graves' pistol drooped. His mouth worked soundlessly. Inanashi stopped 5 paces from him, close enough for him to smell sage and horse sweat and 7 years of hate. "You gave my people blankets soaked in smallpox," she said, clear as a bell across the stunned parade ground. "You murdered children who had never seen a rifle. My son was 3 moons old when the fever cooked him from the inside." Graves tried for bravado. It came out a croak. "I followed orders." "War is war. Tonight," she answered, "you follow mine." She reached slow into the pouch at her belt and drew out a thick folded paper-heavy stock, red wax seal unbroken. She held it high so every soldier could see the eagle and shield. 3 moons ago," she announced, "I rode alone to Washington City. I walked into the office of the Secretary of the Interior and laid my son's moccasin on his desk. I told him what you did." A ripple of shock ran through the ranks. A sergeant crossed himself and unfolded the document and read aloud, voice ringing like a hammer on iron. "By order of the President of the United States, Captain Harlan Graves is hereby stripped of rank and commission for crimes against humanity, to be taken in irons to the military prison at Fort Leavenworth pending court-martial." She let the paper drift from her fingers. It landed at Graves' bare feet like a death warrant. Graves stared at it, mouth working. "Liar," he whispered. "Filthy lying squaw," and drew her knife in one smooth motion and laid the blade against his throat. A single bead of blood welled, bright as the red cloth in her braids. The soldiers twitched. From the ridge came the simultaneous click, 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 click of 7 Winchester hammers thumbed back. Eli spoke again, calm as winter steel. "Any man fires, this fort burns. That paper says the president himself will thank the match." Ann leaned close enough for Graves to feel her breath. "I could take your life now," she whispered, "but my son deserves better than a drunkard's blood spilled in panic. I spare you so every morning you wake in chains, you will remember his name." Graves was crying now, snot and tears cutting channels through the dust on his cheeks. "Say it," she said. He choked. Dagatehi. Louder. "Like you mean it. Dagatehi." He screamed, voice cracking like a child's. She pressed the knife a fraction harder, just enough for the blood to run, then stepped back and wiped the blade clean on her thigh. Sheathed it. She turned to the entire silent fort. "My husband and his warriors ride out unmolested," she declared. Any man raises a hand breaks the word of your own president. Let the desert witness who kept faith today. She walked back to her lance, pulled it from the ground, retied the tiny moccasin so it would not fall no matter how hard the wind blew, mounted Barebhck.Taz, lowered his rifle first, pride blazing in his eyes like sunrise on water. The 6 warriors followed. Eli kept his Henry steady until N reached his side. You did it, he said softly. He'll hang by paper or rope, either way he's finished. Paper is slower, she answered. Good. She looked across the parade ground to Taza. 7 lost years, 1 night of reunion, and now this impossible morning. Their eyes locked no words. Just the smallest nod between husband and wife that carried more weight than any vow spoken in a church. N touched 2 fingers to her forehead in salute to Eli. Plant sage, she said. But not yet. She wheeled the Appaloosa. Taza and the warriors fell in behind her like an honor guard made of night itself. They rode between the silent ranks of blue coats, past the flagpole where the stars and stripes hung limp in shame. Out the open gate and into the pass dot at the crest she paused once. The rising sun struck the tiny moccasin on her lance blue beads flashing like signal fire across the valley. Then they were gone. Swallowed by the mountains that had always been theirs. Graves collapsed to his knees in the dust, clutching the presidential order like it might still save him. The bugler stood frozen, mouthpiece to his lips. No breath left to sound retreat or charge or anything at all. Eli Rooker lowered his rifle at last, turned his back on the fort, and walked out the gate after them. Hat low, coat flapping in the morning wind. The cracked blue bead still warm in his pocket. Behind him, the fort stayed silent long after the dust settled, afraid to even breathe too loud. As though the desert itself might hear and remember who had stood where when justice finally rode in on an Appaloosa, with 1 blind eye and a dead child's shoe tied to its lance. And somewhere high in the rocks, a red-tailed hawk screamed once in triumph before the morning took it. 1 year later, almost to the day, Eli Rooker rode alone into the heart of the Chiricahua Mountains, following a trail no white man had ever been given twice. The directions had come on a scrap of birch bark left under his coffee pot in a line. Shack near Doubtful Canyon, 3 charcoal lines, a hawk feather, and 1 word scratched in Spanish Ven. Come. He had not worn a badge in 12 months. The tin star lay buried somewhere outside Dos Cabezas, along with the last of his excuses. The high country was green with late summer rain, pinyon and ponderosa breathing cool resin into the air. A golden eagle circled overhead, riding thermals like it had all the time in the world. Eli found the place at dusk. A lone cedar grew on a south-facing bench, branches heavy with blue berries, roots clutching red rocks the color of dried blood. Beneath it lay a small cairn of white stones, perfectly round, perfectly placed. Fresh sage smoked in a tiny clay bowl. 1 perfect red-tailed hawk feather stood upright between the stones like a sentinel, and Nanashi sat cross-legged beside the grave, weaving a miniature cradle board no longer than a man's hand. Her hair hung loose now, black and shining, the red war cloth long gone. She wore a simple buckskin dress the color of doeskin after rain. Taz sat a little way off on a fallen log, oiling the action of a Winchester with slow, deliberate strokes. He looked up when Eli's horse nickered, nodded once, and returned to his work. The scar on his face had softened with time and peace. Eli dismounted and walked forward, hat in his hands. Neither Apache spoke. The wind moved through the cedar, whispering secrets older than sorrow. Finally, Ananashi placed the finished cradleboard on the stones. Inside, she tucked the cracked blue trade beads she had carried for 8 years now, beads that had crossed deserts, rivers, and the marble halls of Washington. He would have been 7 summers this moon, she said quietly. Without looking up, Old enough to ride. Old enough to ask why the world is cruel. Eli's throat closed. He knelt and drew a small object from his pocket, the tin star he had worn the night she came back to Das Cabezas. It was tarnished now, edges worn smooth by a year of being carried next to his heart. He laid it on the cairn. Figured the boy ought to have a star of his own, he said, voice rough as gravel. Even if it's only tin. Taza gave a low grunt approval, or maybe thanks. Hard to tell with Taza, and Anashi touched the star gently, tracing the points with one finger. Graves hanged himself in his cell, Eli said. 3 weeks ago. Used his own belt. Left a note that just said the name Dagatehi over and over until the pencil broke. And nodded once, neither pleased nor displeased. Some debts collect themselves. Silence settled, soft and full. A meadowlark called from the slope below. Somewhere a child laughed, bright, sudden, alive. Taza stood, walked over, and placed one large hand on Eli's shoulder. The grip was hard enough to bruise, gentle enough to heal something Eli hadn't known was still broken. Then Taza returned to his log, and Anashi rose. For the first time Eli saw peace in her eyes, real peace, fragile as the first green after fire, but rooted deep. I rode to Washington thinking vengeance would bring my son back, she said. I was wrong. But truth lets the dead rest. She reached out and touched the tin star again, then looked straight at Eli. And sometimes it lets the living breathe. She took Taza's hand. Their fingers twined like they had never been apart, like 7 years had been only a long, terrible dream. Together they turned toward the hidden wickiups higher in the rock smoke curling lazy from cook fires. Children's voices rising on the evening wind, dogs barking at nothing. Life going on the way it was always meant to. Eli watched them go. He did not follow. Some places a man is invited only far enough to know he is forgiven. He mounted up slow, the cedar shadow stretching long across the ground. As he turned his horse downslope, a small boy darted from the brush herding 3 spotted goats. Barefoot, black-eyed, laughing, maybe 6 summers old. The child raised a skinny brown arm in greeting. Eli raised his own in return, throat suddenly tight. Eyes stinging with something that was not quite tears. He rode west beneath a sky wide enough to forgive almost anything. Behind him, under the cedar with no name, a tiny tin star caught the last light of day and shone like it had always belonged there, like it was keeping watch over a little boy who finally had a name, a mother who could laugh again, and a father whose hands no longer shook when he held his wife at night. The meadowlark sang once more, and the mountain wind carried the scent of sage and cedar and new beginnings all the way to the horizon. Eli Rooker never wore a badge again, but every year, on the day the cedar berries turned blue, a fresh sprig of sage appeared on a certain small cairn high in the Chiricahua, laid there by a man with gray in his beard and peace in his eyes. And if you ride that country at dusk, they say you can still hear a woman singing soft now, no longer a death song, but a lullaby for a boy who finally sleeps easy under a tree that remembers everything and forgives. Almost as much. The desert keeps its own, and sometimes, when the world is very quiet, it gives them back.